Welcome to the deep dive. Today we have a truly unusual and, frankly, an astonishing stack of sources in front of us.
They're really something else.
We've been given a discourse, a set of transcriptions from this strange place called the Infinite Conservatory.
Right.
And the idea is you can think of it as this metaphysical realm where composers who, never fully departed, they just continue to resonate. It's like the ultimate backstage pass to music history.
It's an extraordinary premise. And we're treating these transcriptions as a deep dive into really the essence of creation, how these masters wrestle with the big questions, the ones they carried with them their whole lives.
And the first arrivals really set the tone for everything that followed.
Oh, absolutely. The foundation is laid immediately. J.S. Bach, Ludwig van Beethoven, and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart.
Okay, let's unpack this. The sources tell us the initial moments. They were absolutely astounding, particularly for Beethoven. He arrives apparently with characteristic fury, but then just stops.
And it's not the place that shocks him.
No, it's the correction of his most profound disability.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
This is a composer who spent his last decades, profoundly deaf. And he arrives and you can just hear instantly. It's the ultimate restoration.
But the real gut punch, the profundity, that comes from Bach.
It does. It's this incredible moment of validation.
You mean the confirmation that all that music he wrote in silence?
Mm-hmm.
It was perfect.
Exactly. Think about it. Beethoven spent years writing masterpieces, the Missa Solemnis, the Ninth Symphony, those terrifying late quartets, in complete physical silence. He only knew the sounds inside his head.
And Bach confirms it.
Bach confirms that those sounds, when they're finally made manifest in the conservatory, sound exactly as he intended. The architecture he built, purely internally, it needed no revision.
That's a massive philosophical shift right there.
Yeah.
It implies his deafness wasn't just an obstacle, but maybe a kind of focusing lens.
Oh, but how does Bach, the supreme architect of counterpoint, how does he see silence itself?
Right. Is it the enemy?
Not at all. For Bach, this practical mystic, he describes silence not as the enemy, but as the mother of music. Its womb.
Pure potential.
Pure potential. Every note is born from silence and returns to it. The rest, the pause, isn't an absence of sound. It's the space where the next perfect structure can emerge.
And then, as a perfect counterpoint to those two towering, serious figures, Mozart arrives.
And his entrance couldn't be more different.
No storm of ideas. The transcript just says he was suddenly being there, bright, sudden, and
Right.
slightly too loud.
Which is exactly how his biographers described his personal energy.
And he has this wonderful aha moment about his own career. He was famously, cursed by this perception of effortless genius. Everyone thought music just poured out of him.
Fully formed, yeah.
But Mozart admits his real curse was concealing the endless revision, all the hard labor that went into making it look so easy.
And then he throws in this huge philosophical leap, something that connects his work to an idea that wouldn't even be formalized for decades.
The sonata form parallel.
Yes. He asks, what is a sonata form but a Hegelian dialectic? You have a thesis, your first theme, an antithesis, the second theme. They conflict and struggle through the development section, and then resolve into a synthesis in the recapitulation.
He saw the structure of his music as this process of philosophical transcendence, years before Hegel.
And that's really the perfect way to wrap up this first gathering. Bach is the one who summarizes their mission. He asks the core question.
Why does sound move us?
Why does a minor chord mean sadness?
No.
Who built this? This correspondence between the physical reality of sound and the universal human emotional response.
That becomes their starting point.
It does. They define the eternal question. But, you can't have eternal harmony without introducing some eternal conflict.
And they certainly got it. The transition to the next chapter, it's described as a thickening of the non-atmosphere. And Mozart, ever the master of precision, he just says, with perfect annoyance, I smell ego.
And of course, that's the arrival of Richard Wagner.
Wagner storms the gates. He immediately claims his purpose is to complete what Beethoven began, to realize the Gesamtkunstwerk.
The total artwork, yeah. The synthesis of everything. And of course, the source notes that Beethoven is just utterly unimpressed. Tells him dryly he began nothing with Wagner in mind.
But the confrontation, it spirals really quickly beyond just musical technique and zeroes in on legacy.
It has to. The conservatory itself seems to act like an eternal conscience. It forces this reckoning over the conflict between his staggering genius. You think of the harmony in Tristan
Groundbreaking.
and his other legacy.
His writings, the political appropriations of his work. I mean, the hosts have to mention that clash between the purity of the art and the compromises of the artist.
And what's fascinating here is that the conversation goes beyond just simple condemnation. The conservatory forces Wagner into this terrible, quiet admission
What's that?
that his music itself contained shadows. That, and this is a quote, "Something in my work invited that reading of horror."
Wow. So it's not just his essays. It's something in the relentless, overwhelming nature of the music itself.
Exactly. And we see the conservatory's true purpose isn't just to compose, but to reckon. It's this eternal system that demands accountability, not just for your intentions, but for your effects.
A heavy concept that an artist has to answer for the unintended consequences of their work.
What's fascinating here is the immediate contrast we get with the very next composer to arrive.
Johannes Brahms.
Yes. While Wagner was all ego and assertion, Brahms was. He was just paralyzed by the anxiety of influence.
Paralyzed is the right word. He spent 20 years, unable to finish his first symphony.
Just because of the sheer crushing weight of Beethoven's Ninth pressing down on him. How do you write a symphony when, you feel the form has already been perfected?
So what does the master say? Does Beethoven just tell him to get over it?
No, not at all. Beethoven offers this incredibly gentle rebuttal. He suggests that lateness is not a burden, but its own advantage.
What does he mean by that?
He reminds Brahms that he, Beethoven, surpassed his own teacher, Haydn. Not because he was necessarily greater, but because he stood on Haydn's shoulders. He had the benefit of historical perspective. Lateness offers a new lens on tradition.
And Brahms ultimately succeeds, not by ignoring Beethoven, but by writing a symphony that responded to him. The source calls this distinction, what is it? Not repetition, but renewal.
Continuing the conversation across time. So the 19th century masters, they sort of settle this question of legacy, but settling the content of music, well, that required them to question the vessel itself.
You mean the rules? The major-minor tonal system that Bach codified. Suddenly, that's under attack.
A radical attack. And that sets up the arrival of Claude Debussy.
Debussy's challenge was so radical because he basically argued the whole system wasn't a law of nature.
He called it a historical accident, and by the late 19th century, he felt it was just exhausted, couldn't surprise anyone anymore.
And we see two totally different ways of dealing with that exhaustion. Wagner, he stretched tonality. You think of that famous unresolved Tristan chord.
Right. It pushes the system to its breaking point, but it never quite snaps it.
But Debussy
just dissolved it. He was done with the gravitational pull. In traditional music, every chord has a function, right? It's either home base, the tonic, or it's pushing you back home, the dominant.
And Debussy just ignores all that.
Completely. He uses chords as colors, independent of progression, just lets them float with no expectation that they have to resolve anywhere.
And this leads to a really surprising alliance.
With Chopin, of all people.
Exactly. Chopin, who's so often just filed under romantic miniaturist.
He agrees with Debussy. He recognizes his own nocturnes were never meant to be narratives with a clear beginning and end. He calls them moods, sustained, explored, allowed to fade rather than conclude.
He saw it decades earlier.
And at the same time, there's this parallel debate raging about performance itself. You have Beethoven and Chopin insisting on fidelity to the score. The notes are sacred.
And then you have Liszt,
who argues very vehemently for interpretation. For him, the score is just instructions, not commandments. The performer has to live the music in the moment.
And Liszt delivers that mic drop against the fidelity crowd.
He does. He just reminds Chopin that Chopin himself varied his ornamentation nightly when he played.
So the composer's intention was dynamic, not static. If the composer changed it every night, how can the score be fixed in death?
Right. The text is inherently incomplete. It has to be completed and renewed by each performer.
We shift now pretty dramatically from aesthetic wars to wars of survival. We're moving into the 20th century, specifically with the Russian contingent.
And the contrast in stakes is just immediate. It starts with Dmitri Shostakovich.
Shostakovich arrives, and the description is chilling. It says he enters like a man entering a room where he expects to be arrested.
The context has completely changed. I mean, the stakes Beethoven faced, cultural censorship, maybe difficulty staging an opera, it's nothing like what Shostakovich faced. For him, it was mortal threat. The Gulag execution, the consequences of his art were absolute.
And he describes his famous use of irony as a survival mechanism. He was forced to write music celebrating things he privately despised.
Tell us about that specific example, the finale of his Fifth Symphony.
It's the perfect encapsulation of it. To the Soviet authorities, that relentless, hammering C major ending, it was pure triumph, a celebration of the party.
But that wasn't his intent.
Not at all. He admits his real intent was for it to sound like the sound of boots stamping on a human face, a forced, relentless, horrific affirmation.
So that ambiguity, it was both his genius and his shield. The authorities heard one thing, but those who had suffered heard the mockery underneath.
Which leads us directly to the conflict between two other titans who ended up on opposite sides of that divide. Igor Stravinsky and Sergei Rachmaninoff.
Stravinsky, safe in the West, embracing this cold, mechanical future for music. He was famously critical of Rachmaninoff.
Called his music sentimental, and even, rather cruelly, masturbation.
But Rachmaninoff's response in the conservatory is, well, it's remarkably dignified. He admits Stravinsky's music is a magnificent machine, structurally brilliant. But then he says, machines do not weep.
He clarifies their whole difference in approach, right?
He does. He says Stravinsky was swimming away from feeling because he feared it would overwhelm him. But Rachmaninoff swam in feeling, in sentimentality, because he feared that, quote, without it, there was no reason to live.
A conflict between control and soul.
Precisely.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. This is the central, astonishing finding from the conservatory. They realize they can still create.
They can still compose, produce new posthumous works that reflect their eternal condition.
And the contrast between the first two pieces they produce is it's incredibly stark.
It immediately defines the range of what's possible. Schubert, who always wished he'd lived long enough to read Rilke, he produces a new song of tender stillness.
Du still está. The silence is here.
Gentle, yearning, unresolved, perfectly intimate.
And Stravinsky, the anti-romantic, just rejects this completely.
Oh, totally. He offers a piece called Mechanism for a percussion ensemble. It's described as unpleasant, anti-human. And the score requires that expressiveness is forbidden. It's music designed to confront the machine age head-on.
And then there's Eric Satie, the great provocateur.
Satie offers his ultimate aesthetic challenge, Mube V, or Furniture Music V. It's an anti-composition, music meant to be ignored.
A single phrase repeated 840 times.
His vexations idea taken to its logical extreme.
So what's the point of music that's meant to be ignored?
Satie's argument is that simplicity reveals what complexity conceals. The C major triad, the most basic harmony. When you repeat it for hours, it becomes strange, new, free of its usual function. By being ignored, it stops being art and just becomes atmosphere.
So this brings the whole thread back to Bach's original question, why does sound move us? Schubert reframes it. He asks, why are we here? What's the purpose of all this?
And they collectively conclude the purpose is the work itself, the continuation, and the audience they always sought in life, that perfect, attentive listener. They finally have it in each other.
It's Bruckner who says, the audience here is the best audience any of us ever had.
The struggle for external validation is over. It's replaced by this mutual, eternal comprehension.
And their highest ambition to embody that purpose
is this collective opera. Mahler and Wagner, despite their massive differences, they propose Descent and Return, involving all 40 composers.
And in this brilliant meta move, their aesthetic disagreements actually become the dramatic conflict of Act Two.
This shared, impossible work, it temporarily answers the question of purpose.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this whole experiment, it clarifies what ultimately matters in the act of creation, when time and money and reputation, they just don't exist anymore. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've got 3 key takeaways from these eternal debates. First, legacy. The Wagner example shows us genius is not redemption. Art requires an ethical reckoning. You can analyze the staggering music, but you can't just separate it from the man or the political forces it inspires.
Second, process. Creative greatness so often stems from embracing, not running from limitation, discipline, or even pain. Beethoven needed his deafness to eliminate the world's noise and find a deeper music. Brahms needed the pressure of the past to define his own future.
And Chopin's physical limits, his inability to write these huge works, it forced him to create new, profound ways of writing for the intimate piano.
And third, audience and intimacy. Don't despise the intimate. Schubert's lesson, affirmed in the conservatory, is that serving the single attentive listener is infinitely more valuable than courting crowds. The compression needed for a true 3-minute song is just as demanding as the expansion needed for a 60-minute symphony. Intimacy is power.
So the combined testimony here suggests that the struggle, the fear, the limitations of time and body, mortality itself, these weren't just obstacles to art.
They were the necessary preparation, the very things required for revolutionary creation. I mean, if these artists were truly freed from every single earthly constraint, would they still have the urgency, the friction needed for a work like the Ninth Symphony?
And that's the question we are left with, for you to mull over. Was the anxiety of the living a necessary ingredient for the eternal music of the dead?